Welcome back to React Native Radio Podcast. I actually did an Eclipse joke that should have been on this episode, so go listen to that. Episode 296, NASA uses Ignite.
Mazen, you grew up in Africa, right?
Yeah, I lived in Nigeria for pretty much majority of my life.
What ages are we talking?
Up until I was 18 and a half.
Okay. Yeah. Very formative years for you.
Yeah.
Well, I just got back from Africa. Now, obviously, you were in Nigeria. I just got back from, West Africa. I just came back from Kenya, which is East Africa. Mm-hmm. How close to the equator were you in Nigeria?
Pretty close. I think Nigeria is just a couple, I don't know, hour or two north of it. I think the equator kind of goes through Cameroon.
Okay.
And I think Kenya at some point.
Yeah, it does go through Kenya. Yeah. It was a little bit north of us.
Okay. I was above. The town I grew up in, Jos, is just north.
Okay, yeah. Well, this was my first time to Africa, and I brought the whole family, which was cool. There were 7 of us. My 4 kids, my oldest son, Cedric's wife as well, Trisha, my wife and I. And we were there for about a week, a little over a week. And it was awesome. It was really cool. Nairobi is an amazing city. It is a little overwhelming.
So I've heard, yeah.
But the people of Kenya, so incredibly nice, like incredibly nice people. And I don't know, it was honestly a pretty transformational trip for all of us. It was like half vacation, but also like half helping out with some charities that we've supported in the past and getting to see what they do kind of firsthand and whatnot. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome. And I saw from the pictures you went on a safari. That's probably my favorite part of growing up in Nigeria, being able to do that on the weekends kind of thing.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, it's just like a zoo right next to Nairobi, but it's not a zoo. It's like
exactly
the wilderness. It's the savannah. It's like just like a lion walks by you 15 feet away. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Andrew, have you ever been to Africa before?
I haven't yet, but it's actually on the list of very, very shortly planning to go. I have a bunch of friends from South Africa.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Yeah. South Africa is a whole nother world then, of course, quite a bit further south from Kenya and Nigeria. How about you, Nima? Have you ever been to Africa?
No, I haven't been that adventurous yet. My wife has been to many countries in Africa. She's way more adventurous than I am.
She just enjoy travel, or does she do something over there?
Yeah, she enjoys traveling to different countries. She speaks so many different languages, I've lost count. So she really enjoys traveling.
That's cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Most everybody that we met in Kenya spoke 3 languages. They would speak English, which is a official language there. They would also speak Swahili. Most of their speaking between each other would be Swahili or a mix of Swahili and English. And then almost everybody also has a mother tongue, like a tribal language that they grew up with, although not everybody. And I found that kind of interesting. Some people, their native language, they consider to be Swahili or English, but very foreign for like an American, growing up just speaking English. Although my mom's first language was Finnish, and she never taught any of us that, but that's all right. Mm-hmm. Anyway, well, I guess we should get into our episode here. I'm Jamon Holmgren, your host, friendly CTO of Infinite Red, and I live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest with my wife and kids, and I play some hockey. I drive my tractor whenever I get an excuse to, of course. I'm joined today by my stellar co-host, Mazen. I think that's particularly appropriate.
See what you did there?
Yes. As well as our guests, Andrew and Nima. Mazen lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife and toddler. He's a former pro soccer player and coach and is a senior React Native engineer here at Infinite Red. Andrew, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for hosting us. So I'm here today with Nima, our Chief of Operations. I guess I'll start a little bit with a personal background. I'm also an immigrant, similar to Mazen. I grew up in Ukraine, and I was there for the first 20 years. And then I came to US for grad school. It was sort of a lucky chance where I was invited to continue the studies here. And I came initially to New Hampshire. I did my grad school over there. So it was about 5 years in semi-cold environment. Yeah, and then I realized that snow is not my thing, and I moved to Austin. So I've been in Austin for over 10 years now. It's always difficult to say sort of when I got myself into software, but sort of all of my life I've been coding many different things. But my formal education has been engineering. Like I got my bachelor, it was manufacturing, and then I moved on to for my grad school. I did my PhD in like computational engineering and material science. And then, yeah, what brought me to Austin, it was back in 2013. Everybody was excited about electric vehicles and figuring out how to make them work well with the new battery types. So I did my postdoc in electrical vehicles and sort of battery operations. That was fun, but it was sort of a short project, and then that switched me completely in a different direction. I went and was head of cardiovascular research lab at University of Texas at Austin. So really, when I try to describe my background, I just did a bunch of engineering in different areas. Throughout all of the common thread has always been software. I sort of got my first experience, I want to say I was 10 or 11, when my dad gave me Carnegie and Ricci C. So I started with the traditional language, and then that escalated in many different things throughout the years. Once somebody asked me like how many languages it was, I counted over 25 different languages that I wrote code in. And that really all the way from microprocessors through, of course, web and mobile these days, and all the way through doing supercomputers and AI work when I was in research environment. So yeah, that's just sort of quickly galloping through my experiences with tech. But back in 2016, Monica, my current wife, at the time we literally just got married, I'm like, hey, I think both of us want to travel and we don't want to be in the office. Let's start a company. So we both left. I was at university. She was in a large corporate job. We both left that and started Solwey. Initially, it was literally just two of us and a laptop. Now we've grown into having over 30 people full time. So still sort of on a boutiques level, but slowly growing into a little bit larger entity. And then Nima joined us, 2-3 years ago? What is this, almost 3?
3 years, yes. Exactly.
Yeah. At the time, Nima already went to DC. He used to live in Austin, so we met in Austin.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and actually when they started the company, all of us were living in his house because Monica and I were just, fresh off the boat with no money to pay rent. And Nima was like, I just bought a house. That's free space. So yeah, actually, when we started the company, it was actually in his house official address. And then, he moved to DC, and then I convinced him a few years later that, hey, this is growing. This is becoming really fun. So come join the team.
That's awesome. Nima, you want to tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I grew up in Iran. My mother is Kurdish, and my father is Turkish. So I also grew up with different languages, and I studied civil engineering. I was doing some very initial work in 2006. Was the first time that I discovered artificial neural networks, and I was trying to solve a prediction problem. So I found it very interesting that they were behaving so much better than the nonlinear regression that I was using at the time. I went to Penn State for my doctoral program, and that's when I got into computational stuff a lot more, especially evolutionary algorithms and AI stuff for basically advancing the field of pavement engineering. It's kind of like under...
Okay.
Yeah, it's under transportation infrastructure, basically. After I graduated from Penn State, exactly the same year that Andrew moved to Austin, I moved to Austin, and then there was a party called Eurocircle, which was like European expats kind of joining together. And that's where I met Andrew and realized how we really enjoyed talking about the same topics and stuff. As Andrew said, in 2016, when I bought a house, I was feeling very lonely. So I was like, Andrew, why don't you come live in my house? And it became the incubator, I guess, for... I did not allow them to use the garage because I was using the garage for my own car, so they had to work from the bedroom. My background was, mostly in larger engineering firms. I have been mostly in kind of a management role, and kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, and now in Solwey, I basically try to make it a little bit more organized, out of the chaos of these developers.
That's awesome. Well, you all obviously have a varied background, including Mazen as well. So this is representing a good part of the globe. This is awesome. Before we get into the topic, let's hear from our sponsor. This episode is sponsored, as always, by Infinite Red. Infinite Red is a premier React Native consultancy located fully remote in the US and Canada. If you're looking for React Native expertise for your next project, hit us up at infinite.red/React Native. And don't forget to mention that you heard about us through the React Native Radio podcast. All right, let's get into our topic for today. Today, we're going to be talking about NASA's Spot the Station app, and we'll talk a bit about Ignite as well. Andrew and Nima were key players in making this thing happen. So I want to really, first off, let's talk about Spot the Station. What is this app and what does it do?
I'll definitely hand this off to Nima. He does a way better job explaining this than I do.
Yeah, so NASA has a website called Spot the Station. It's spotthestation.nasa.gov. So basically, it is a website designed to inspire younger folks and people who are interested in the space exploration, kind of get engaged with all of the activities that NASA is doing, and get them kind of amped up to pursue maybe a career in the same area. So this website was basically allowing people to find opportunities where they can spot the station in the sky near themselves, right? So you put in like a GPS coordinate of yourself, and it gives you a list of potential sightings in the future when it's going to be dark in your area, and basically the space station is going to be visible from where you are. But this was not really easy to use, because even though you would get the list of when you can look at the sky, you didn't know exactly what direction to look at. It had some listing of where does it rise and where does it set, but it wouldn't be easy for the users to know exactly specifically where to look. So that's when they decided to create an app so that they would use augmented reality to help users basically themselves in the correct direction, look at the correct direction, and make sure that they can see the station. So that is when they initiated a competition for the design and for the development of the app. And our company won the competition for the development side.
That's awesome.
So that's when we started, yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think this question probably goes to Andrew. Do you mind digging a little bit into the tech stack and some decisions that you made around that?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Solwey's a consulting firm, so you must have made some decisions there for your team.
We got approached with the position where, here's a project, here's the budget we have, because it's a publicly funded project, ideally, as efficient as possible. We do want to roll it out to 2 platforms, both iOS and Android. Sort of what options do you have? And honestly, our go-to for years have now been React Native. There's been very few apps where we had to go and build native code. But even then, the first hybrid apps I started playing with was like Xamarin. Do not recommend that. cannot say how difficult that was. Then we spent a few years on Ionic. That was fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But like biggest difference, and I don't know how technical our audience is, so feel free to stop me and tell me I'm going way too far. But the biggest difference with Ionic and with the React Native was Ionic was really just a web view with lots of fancy stuff around it. So if you were to build any native extension, it was a nightmare. It was just a complete nightmare to get them to work. With React Native, since you're still using the native views and a lot of native elements, writing the bridge and writing native elements is really so straightforward that we pretty much almost never see a situation where we have to go completely native. Because if we need a native element, we just go and add it through an extension. That's about it. And we've never had issues bridging the two, like the native code and the React Native side, even including like things like here. The challenge with this code or with this app specifically, it wasn't the user stories. The user stories were very straightforward because they're like, look, here's what the app is supposed to do. There's a space station. There's going to be a map. There's going to be AR view, and there's going to be some informational screens. Done. Very straightforward, very easy description. But the difficulty that we immediately sort of saw that would be happening in development is there's no, or at least we couldn't find libraries in the public space that allow you to easily do astronomical calculations on the phone. There's tons of Python libraries that do that, but really not that much that you can do in JavaScript or even in native code. So our concern from the very beginning was, are we going to run into CPU issues and, because we write complex mathematics? Ended up not being a very difficult issue, which we can talk a little bit more separately. But yeah, so our decision-making process was, we love React Native, we love going with it. And even though we have AR, which is really a native feature, we've had experience in the past where we've done several interesting elements with using overlays on the camera, and AR libraries were relatively nascent at that time. So this was almost a year now ago when we started this. So we went through all of the sort of initial experiments, proof of concept, and we're like, okay, we can definitely pull it off for React Native. Complete sidebar. We had lots of internal discussions about Flutter. And one of our team members grabbed our code and completely rewrote it in Flutter. We need to go publish it. I need to look at it a little bit more and make sure that it's safe. But we actually have a copy of the app that was done, honestly, just like out of curiosity, just trying to reproduce exactly the same thing in Flutter. And we still have a lot of arguments about which one was faster to develop, but but both were very positive experiences.
Okay,
cool. It sounds like you've built more apps in React Native. Is Ignite usually your go-to when you're building some of these applications?
So yes, absolutely yes. I cannot tell you how grateful I am that it exists.
That's awesome.
So the way we operate is we always start from starter projects. Because what I learned is that if you don't set good standards and good practices from the beginning, you'll pay dearly later on. So for all of the full stack apps, we have like 2 or 3 starters that are sitting in my GitHub under my name. And, this A, it gives, transparency and visibility. B, it gives predictability and code delivery for us. So yeah, when we do like node-based projects, we're like Node and React, here's CI, here's everything set up, there we go. So when I started, it was a project we were building for a startup in Seattle. Oh my God, that was, that must have been 2018. I think it was around that time. And I started looking around for starters and examples for React Native. And I tried a few and I came across this one. I'm like, this is perfect. Yeah, there's a few things that I'm not a big fan of or I want to do differently, but it doesn't matter. Like even in our own starter, there are things that we switch between the projects. So I showed it to our customer. I'm like, look, it has everything. We can customize it. This is perfect. So I think this was the first time we used it. Okay. And then since then, pretty much whenever we start a project, I just go and download the latest version of the generator and go from there. So yeah, I've been using Ignite forever. Actually, I blame it on you guys switching me from Redux on MSD.
Ooh, okay. I'm sure Jamon's happy to hear that.
I'm very happy to hear this.
Me too, because at the time it was a trend to use Redux for everything.
Right.
And I was never a fan. I was like, guys, you just cannot put functional coding into JavaScript. Just no. But there was more or less a single voice in the community. And then I remember I opened the starter, and I'm like, oh, this looks interesting. I haven't used this before, but I'll try it. I tried it, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not going back. That's it. We're done here. Like this is so much better.
So I have a follow-up question, and this might be just some self promotion here, but any chance you're also using Reactotron?
Yes and no. I had a mixed experience with it. Myself, I love it. But honestly, over the years, what is the full name of it? I confused the name of them. The React Native debugger took over. But in the beginning, I was exclusively using Reactotron and sort of converting developers into it. So definitely yes. Later on, we had a few times where we ran into a weird, honestly, I think it's just developers misusing it, not seeing information there, or having some library incompatibilities. Those wonderful days of React Native changing everything every 5 minutes. So that sort of put it a little bit more further down the debugging cycle. But yeah, when the React Native debugger came out, I think everybody started switching. At least on our team, everybody was really excited because it was finally doing what it was supposed to be doing, which is unusual. But it's still weird for me because like when you're doing work on the Mac side, there's still funny things happening on the debugging. Like I personally prefer doing all the debugging on Android for a million reasons. But again, I'm not sure I'm the popular voice.
I hear that. It's a good thing we have some choices, and actually the debugging experience is currently in flux again with the new React Native JS inspector that's going to be coming out. That's still in development. We did an episode about that recently, and I'm sure we're going to be doing more just because that's a big deal. I think Reactotron still has a place in the toolbox for a lot of people. It's lightweight. It just sort of does what you want it to do and kind of gets out of the way for the rest. And we're also putting a bunch of work into it to make it even more lightweight. Some kind of fun improvements and whatnot, user experience improvements. But I totally get it if people want to use more the blessed route of the JS debugger or the new JS inspector. I'm really curious, when you were building out this app with Ignite, what sort of what were some of the things that you ran into when you were building it out? Were there any major challenges either with Ignite or React Native itself that you had to really kind of sink your teeth into to solve?
That's a really good question. So, and I know how to get the answer to it. I'm just going to open commit history.
That's a good point. Yeah. Again, I want to point out to people, this is a public, open source project. So you can go check it out at github/NASA/spot the station. It's wide open. I just forked it myself so I can take a look at the code on my own side of things. So feel free to do that.
Yeah. Thanks for the promo. I really appreciate that. We were very excited when we got approval from NASA to make it open source because I come from academic background. I want everything to be open source as much as possible, and honestly, not purely just from the community building perspective, but honestly, I'm a strong believer that public security or security through public repos is always stronger. So yeah, for me, it's, especially when you're talking about a government project, if somebody finds something and, they'll help us fix it, I'll be very grateful.
Absolutely.
I think you need to publish how you convince the government to go open source.
I can tell you how. So there's a tiny little bit of detail that I didn't mention. So for the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I've been one of the co-chairs at the interagency committee called Credible Practice Model and Simulation in Healthcare. And the only purpose of this committee is to convince the government and the commercial sector that, there are good practices and there are what we call 10 simple rules of how to make model and simulation A, predictable, B, transparent to the community, and C, reproducible. We have a lot of experience, and that when I say interagency, that's FDA, NIH, NASA and a few large manufacturers that are part of this. So we have a lot of experience talking specifically the same language. And, one of my colleagues is from NASA, as to why, things have to be done with version control, as to why things have to be done with tests and things like that. And that's why when we're talking to them, we essentially was using NASA's own language, telling them, like, this is what you guys tell us, this is what you published. And interesting tidbit, all of these initiatives were started from the shuttle disaster. Mm-hmm. So when the government, when Congress created a committee and started looking at this, and the outside audit was happening with NASA, this is when they came up with the standards and a lot of practices of how to make software predictable and reliable, and how to make modeling reproducible and trustworthy. So all of that actually came from that singular event, and that completely changed really all of the US direction on how software should be used and how it should be evaluated. So it was a little bit of convincing, but because the project from the beginning was announced as an education project, an outreach project, it was not too difficult because we have no secret data. We don't use any sensitive information or any restricted sources. So because of that, they're like, okay, yeah, education full way, let's go. And they were very, very very helpful in getting everything over the finish line. Publishing apps is always painful, and then publishing repos and making sure everything is all set. They did a really good job helping us manage that.
Yeah, let's talk about the technical challenges, like the types of things that you ran into from either Ignite or React Native or just the mobile platform in general. What types of things really took a lot of effort to work through?
Yeah, so there was several things. If we talk just purely about Ignite, I think our stack now more or less fully matches. We were happy to continue working the Typescript template. We were happy to work with all the state management and internalization. Like everything made sense. Pretty much we only removed, I think, example files. I'm looking right now through the repo, and the skeleton was exactly the same. So from that perspective, it was a great starter. We just went and started going. I recently learned this term, so I'm going to be repeating that everywhere now. It was accelerant to value. So, we jumped in and started coding. And that was really good. The NASA team was actually very impressed that, they could start seeing demos very quickly. And internally, I'm actually very curious how other people are doing this, but we usually split the testing or the releases into two sort of buckets. The ones that go through test flight and Google Play, that's pretty much pre-prod. And then staging and internal testing all goes through Firebase distribution. So it used to be called I forgot what it's called before they acquired it. But yeah, I was App Hockey or something. I don't remember. Yeah, I used it before it was Firebase distribution and then stayed with it. So always a happy camper there. So the way we started the process is we started making builds from very basic user stories, which I think we started just with a map, basic visualization, some mock data, and adding also informational page, which was like their blog. And then in the beginning, actually, we had ideas of doing sign up. And this is an interesting thing working on a large scale project, especially when we have US involved as a government entity. We started talking about sign up and all of this, and we realized that they might be way too much difficulty convincing people that we're not collecting their personal info with their GPS coordinates. So we went in the direction, okay, this is going to be without user registration, because we just explaining the way why we need your GPS coordinates in your full name and email, it might be tricky. Because, for us, if we want to observe and if we want to save your settings, we need a user account, we need a profile, and we need to know your exact coordinates. Because of sensitivity of this topic, we went in the other direction where, okay, we're not even going to have a server really. The only thing the server is going to do. So we have a backend endpoint also in GitHub repo that serves pre-processed trajectory data. Essentially, as much as possible is done on that endpoint and in that database, and then you just download that file. But then all of the calculations, absolutely everything, is done locally on the phone. And that was one of the challenges, because we wanted to make sure that, okay, if we don't want to deal with sensitivity issues and explaining away, the tracking portion, okay, what can we do and how can we implement it? And the way we implemented this is that we created semi-permanent sessions using local storage to, track users. Because, we don't even ask their names anymore. We just assign them UDID. It's that will eventually be used for, error reporting, like we use Sentry for error reporting. And for Google Analytics purposes, well, we don't even use that. They use their own cookie. But pretty much we don't collect any information. We don't know anything about the end users except for errors and, the number of downloads. Of course, we have basics information about the screens viewed and stuff like this, but really we don't send any API. And that means that we create a semi-permanent session. And when I say semi-permanent, really 99% of the time it is permanent until you reinstall the app. But, there's glitches and random things. So semi-permanent. But other than that, you have a session, you log in, you enter your profile information. All of it is done locally. All of it is stored locally. And then we actually implemented two different modes. We don't use the first mode anymore. We used to have a mode where you can send the GPS coordinates to the server, and server will respond back with the trajectory estimates. And honestly, there was more done in the beginning for testing purposes while we're figuring out and optimizing code for local calculations. And then eventually we switched to the second mode, which is now the default, where after you receive the pre-processed trajectory information, the calculation for when the space station is going to be above you, what's going to be the angle, how long it's going to be in the sky, all of this done locally. And we were really worried about timing and the CPU load. And one of the things we're considering doing is building a native bridge and sort of having it precompiled, like the Python trick where Python compiled into Python or precompiled binary. But what was interesting is that we were using, it was 0.69, which means the precompilation and the new engine were already available. So essentially, when we were trying to compare like how fast the for loops and all of this is evaluated, because we have to process in 20,000-30,000 points and calculate our trajectories and velocities, because the way it's done is for you to observe the space station, we give you a 14-day window of predictions. So for the data that's provided by this by the public trajectory website from NASA, they provide data for every 2 minutes, I think, something like this. So we are talking about 30 by 24, about 700 points per day. And if we do it for 14 days, it's 10,000 points. So we were worried, if we're cycling through 10,000 points in a loop, they're going to have any issues. Nope, none of the issues at all. We checked actually the response times from the Python server. And again, this was not unoptimized Python code and sort of semi-optimized precompiled JavaScript. It was pretty much the same. So running it locally was really, really effective. Also, more importantly, if you're running it locally, you can use a trick where you can pretty much stream it, because you can start populating data. As soon as you get the first one, you don't have to wait for all 14 to go and send the response. So actually, the UX was more responsive with the local calculations, and that was a lot of fun. So that's challenge number one, and we spent quite a bit of time on the accuracy, and then if anybody ever wants, we can have a separate conversation about that. There's two different ways and two different camps on how to calculate a trajectory. One is based on what they call OAM, which is the trajectory data. Another one is called TLE, which is the prediction model based on the vectors. And we ended up implementing both, and then having rounds of conversations, which one should be preferred. And then the decision was made, okay, the website uses OAM version, which is the trajectory based. So let's make sure that the app matches the website. And of course, then we learned that there is undocumented features in their prediction code, obviously. So it took us a while to trace how to make sure that our predictions are the same as on the website. And it ended up being not any differences in algo or anything. It's just there was several conditions that were not mentioned in the beginning that we had to implement. It was a fun experience.
Wow. Yeah.
The most interesting situation that we had to account for was when we were looking at all the sightings that were during the night or like twilight time, so that, the station would be visible in the sky. But there are sometimes during the night that the Earth comes between the sun and the space station and basically casts a shadow over the space station. So the space station is not bright anymore. So even though it's night in your location and the space station is above your head, but you can't see it. So we had to account for those situations also. There were calculations that we had to put in the code for that.
Well, that's particularly appropriate considering we just had the eclipse yesterday.
I was in Austin, so yeah.
You got to see it then.
Well, it was very cloudy, but yeah, we were actually in the direct path. So I was trying to show to my kids, like, look, this is important. And they saw the pool and jumped in the pool. So
yeah, right. Classic. Well, there was an eclipse in 2017, only like 2 hours south of me. I easily could have gone, and I didn't bother going. And now I just kicked myself afterward, like, oh, seriously? I could have done it. Looking through the code, it's nice that this is open source. It's really fun to kind of like go through and see familiar patterns that we see with Ignite over and over and over. This is one of the benefits, in my opinion, of Ignite, that like having a community of people that all kind of use similar patterns and similar ways of kind of approaching these problems, I think it just sort of like aligns everybody in a direction, and you can get help easier that way. You can hire for people that already know this stuff. There's more, blogs and resources out there. I did notice one thing that's kind of interesting. Mazen and I actually worked on this feature. You're using the translation and internationalization quite heavily.
Yes. So that was one of the I don't remember if it was requirements or suggestions. Because International Space Station is collaboration across many nations.
Many nations. That's right.
Yeah, and we wanted to cover for initial release. Nima, our initial release was October or November? I'm trying to remember.
It was November. Yeah, and there were 10 different languages.
Yeah. And we were really worried. Like, I was mostly worried about the layout breaking completely, because you never know how much the strings and everything is going to change across phones. And then of course the accessibility was a very important part of this. So we wanted to do a lot of testing on different languages and being able to switch them, but it ended up being more fun than I expected. Because we plugged everything in. You already had the translation engine there. You already had the string substitution. So we just put all of it in. And then we tried to run through it on several devices. And we did have to adjust a few screens, but honestly, it was just literally just font scaling. That's about it. And then the rest we handed off. Initially, it was literally friends and family plan. So we grabbed everybody on the team, because our team is quite international. We have people in US, we have people in US with different backgrounds, like Nima and myself. I have a team in Ukraine. We have a few people in Colombia. I have one person in Mexico. So we're like, okay, we can cover a lot of languages. So we did that first. And then NASA internal review team also requested to just grab all of the files. And that was nice because we just point them to, just text files or JSON files. And we didn't have to do anything beyond that. They didn't have to know any technical implementation.
That's so cool. I really like what is set up here, and it's one of the places where more recently I've had more impact, and Mazen, of course, as well, on Ignite, which it's fun to see this being used for actual things. One thing I noticed you're not using, which I think would be a good maybe PR that I could send in, is there's actually some ways you can use Typescript to enforce that all of the strings are there between them. Because you use essentially like a canonical.
Oh, yeah.
You take one of them as being canonical, maybe English, and then you use that and then you can export the types and the shape of the data and make sure that every translation has that. That might be a PR that I could send in.
Yeah, that would be appreciated, because I'm always worried about missing strings.
Right.
And I thought about for a second, we were really sort of rushing the translations. So I thought about for a second, try to enforce it or put it somewhere in the tests, but like, nope, we have to go, run.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. I do really like using TypeScript for this, because for some reason it just works super slick.
Yeah.
But yeah, that might be something I send in just to kind of poke it the right direction.
Oh, that would be much
we do have that in Ignite now. Mazen and I put that together. I don't know, it's probably about a year ago or maybe a little less.
Well, you guys were chatting, I just was quickly checking. So yeah, when we started the project, we were in 0.69 and Hermes was still in opt-in. And we ran a test and we did see a difference for local calculations. So then we just upgraded to 0.7 something. I think it's 0.71 now, where, there was a default and it felt like, okay, this is sort of blessed to be used in production. And it does work really, really impressively well.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So I kind of want to shift the conversation a little bit towards one of the features in the app, the second tab, which is called the AR view tab, which I think is what the label calls it. Can you just briefly just give us any advice you might have for people that want to build such features? Any challenges you may have run into? Because this seems to be like the main aspect of the app, right? I think when I first downloaded it, that was the app I spent the tab I spent a majority of my time on. And I believe you're using Expo GL for this. Is that correct?
We tried everything. So when you asked about challenges, the challenge one was the calculations and sort of the actual, core functionality of figuring out what the space station is. The challenge two was that when we did the proof of concept and experiments, we grabbed several packages that were available there, and everything just works. Everything looks great. And then, we tried to go to production, and we tried everything. So we tried to use the AR Vira project, which is really, really nice. Like the React Vira is really good set of tools that does a lot of things really well. But then we were running into weird performance issues or weird calibration issues. So then we switched that and tried to use AR Core directly, sort of without anything in between. Then spend a lot of time on that, still running into calibration or getting stuck or compass issues or performance issues. Like one of the funny things that was driving me completely nuts is we had visualization in the AR mode of the trajectory where if you're looking around and you're sort of moving your phone around, the space station was just sort of a 2D asset. The trajectory where it was going, it already went, it was like a straight polyline. But then for the future trajectory, we wanted to follow the UI in the 2D, and it was individual dots. And of course, individual dots you can do like as spheres in the AR. So for completely unpredictable reasons, on, I think, Android, it was working. Oh, no, the other one. I think on iPhone, it was working fine. And then on Android, there must be some memory leak or something, because the longer AR is on, the more it gets sluggish to the point where it freezes completely over and then the app crashes. And we spent ridiculous amount of time trying to fix that, and they're like, screw this is just not working. So then we removed AR Core, we removed all of this, and went back to the basics. And then we started taking out individual pieces from different projects and sort of trying to mix and match them into a final version that we have now. So that was really, really challenging. And what we found is essentially if we're ever building AR module again, we might have to invest our time to, build something ourselves or heavily customize in the way we did it here. That was really tricky. And the most annoying part was, of course, from the outside, from non-technical people, like, but it works. Why you guys cannot just fix this bug? And we're like, how can I say this? It's supposed to work. And we fixed it. And then the most annoying one, I just remember looking at the commit history. So the one that drove, I think, everybody to insanity was, for some reason, the taking screenshot, which was supposed to be the most trivial feature, was impossible to do. Because one of the features we had was on when you are in AR mode, you click a button and it takes a screenshot with the overlay. Well, that feature was the most difficult to implement because for some reason it was working absolutely fine on one phone, completely not working and giving you black screen on another, and on the third phone it would give you just the background and no overlay. Random bugs and libraries just for no reason, just to have fun. So I think we ended up implementing functionality where most probably that trick is still in place. I don't think we ever figured out how to do it natively, where I think on iPhone it takes the screenshot and it's fine, but then on Android it takes two screenshots, one of the background, one of the foreground, and then we manually combine them. Something like this. It was ridiculous because for some reason we just could never get it to work. We checked all the libraries, we checked all the native system calls. It just some phones, so something just in the Android libraries themselves was slightly different and didn't work correctly. And then sort of between different Android versions the same. So it was ridiculous things that we never expected to have issues with. And they just were not getting to the finish line. Yeah. So that was really, really the challenging part. Another interesting aspect that hit me only when we were finishing the project is, the way AR works is it needs to anchor to something. Mm-hmm. And after it anchors, then it can use the accelerometer and all the other sensors. And part of it is image tracking to continue maintaining the position. Well, here's the fun challenge. When you take your phone and you point it into dark sky, and ideally as dark as possible so that you don't have city lights disturbing the view of the space station, and ideally no clouds so that you can actually see the space station, what do you have as an anchor? Mm-hmm. Nothing.
Yeah, there's nothing there.
So we ran into a weird issue where I recently was reading an article, I think it was either Apple or Microsoft who realized that too, where if you don't have good anchors, and it's easy to have anchors in the interior, it's really not that easy when you're outside, or especially in a dark environment. All of this goes haywire. So we had to add several sort of safety checks and backup options where if the AR initialization fails, and this was the funniest conversation because, when we tested in the office, and, we pointed somewhere, check where the space station is, of course, everything works. And then we get this requests and, feedback from the end users or beta testers. They're like, guys, this is not working and everything is jumping and we don't understand why. I'm like, but it's working fine. Like, I cannot reproduce this. So what we learned is, even if we talk about AR applications, you have to be really aware of what you are using it for. And in our case, we essentially have default AR that comes from iOS and Android and checking the an alignment and initialization from there. And if that call fails, our backup is purely to use compass and accelerometers as our anchoring because there's nothing in the image.
Yeah.
So that was another one that, was fun. Challenge.
Yeah, no kidding.
And and that's the crazy part is that both of the things I described, take a screenshot or alignment of AR, they're supposed to just work. You never expect it to be any issue whatsoever. But this is the nice benefit or pressure of working with large user base where either at 500,000 users already or we're already above that, which means there's edge cases upon edge cases upon edge cases.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. Well, man, I have a bunch more questions that unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to here, running out of time. Just to wrap up, I would like to ask you, Andrew, what advice would you give to companies out there who want to build a React Native app?
Start with Ignite. I'm sorry, I'm going to promote you guys.
I love
it. No, but more importantly, when you're working on React Native apps, what we learned is never trust the simulator. Just everything that it works on my laptop or it works on my simulator, that just backfires really badly. So always test in real phones. And ideally, and as I was saying, even if you don't have large beta testing team, just go and give it to your friends and ideally as non-technical as possible because they will represent the users. Because if they don't know the code base, they don't know the mission of the app, that means they're just going to be clicking around and that's the users you want. So collect feedback as soon as possible on the variety of devices and from a variety of users, and really pay attention to questions of scaling and differences. Because one of the most difficult things we found deploying to large user base is, everybody might have an iPhone or everybody might have an iPhone Plus, but every single one of them is going to have different zoom setting. And that's it. And if you don't account for that, or you don't scale together with it, there's just everything in your design just becomes a nightmare and falls apart.
We ran into this with a logistics company that was targeting more like long distance truckers and stuff who are much older generation. A lot of them have their font size cranked way up, and everything broke.
By the way, literally the same experience. We had a logistics company. The app was designed for the drivers, and the drivers are on the road. And as you said, majority of them are also in the older population, which means massive scaling is on.
Right.
Same thing. It was really, really tricky.
Yeah, exactly. And when you have, a 23-year-old designer with a giant 5K display, they're gonna design it differently with their perfect young eyes, So
and then the last thing I think I want to add is, from day one, make sure that your builds are automated, either in the cloud or in your local, but build as fast as you can.
I agree with that. That's huge. Build it. I always try to tell my developers, like, start with get the icon on your screen automated end to end. Even if when you tap it, it crashes, that's okay. Like, I just want it on there so that then we can start from there and everything's wired up end to end. Very, very cool. This is so fascinating, Andrew. Where can people find you if they want to ask you questions or follow what you do?
Not my email.
You and me both.
But LinkedIn, reach out on the website, reach out on social media, both private messages and public. We are ramping up our social media calendar as well, so we'll be a lot more presence. And if you find me at conferences, absolutely approach me and harass me as many questions as possible, because I love talking.
Absolutely. This is awesome. Well, that's it for us. Mazen, do you have a dad joke to take us out?
I need a doctor's appointment. How about 10 tomorrow? Nah, that's too many.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks to Nima and Andrew, and we will see you all next time.
As always, thanks to our production team, with editor Todd Worth, our assistant editor, this guy, Jed Bartosky, our director of communications and episode release coordinator, Justin Husky, and our guest coordinator, Derek Greenberg. Our producer and host is Jamon Holmgren, and executive producers and hosts are Robin Hines and Mazen Chami. Thanks to our sponsor, Infinite Red. Check us out at infinite.red/React Native. A special thanks to all of you listening today. Make sure to subscribe to React Native Radio wherever you get your podcasts. And leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you think.